Hello, everyone. Welcome to our first group webinar, Understanding Evidence-Based Research. I'm Beth Sullivan, Chairman of the International Down Syndrome Community, and I'm here today with Dr. James Hendrix, the Chief Scientific Officer at LuMind IDSC. Prior to joining LuMind IDSC, Jim was Director, Global Science Initiatives at the Alzheimer's Association, where he provided leadership on specific domestic and international efforts focused on advancing the division's science agenda. He managed industry consortia, such as the Alzheimer's Association Research Roundtable, and assisted with the coordination of the IDEAS study on the clinical usefulness of amyloid PET imaging. Before joining the Alzheimer's Association, Dr. Hendrix spent 18 years working at Sanofi, Aventis, and predecessor companies, including companies focused on the treatment of Alzheimer's disease. Dr. Hendrix received his PhD and a postdoctoral fellowship from Colorado State University. And today, Jim is going to be speaking on understanding evidence-based research. So with that, Jim, I will hand it over to you.
Thank you, Beth. Thanks, everybody, for joining today. So, yes, my goal is to talk about what is evidence-based research. In other words, to help you understand, as you read things, as things come to your attention, what kind of research has strong evidence behind it, and what kind of research you need to maybe reconsider or think twice about whether it's something that is valid and valuable for yourself or your loved ones. So let's dive right in. What is research that you would call evidence-based? Well, I would say let's start with the basics. Research that follows the scientific method is more likely to deliver evidence-based research. And so what's the scientific method? Well, we all learned it in elementary school, but just in case you have forgotten, it's simply you develop a hypothesis, and then the second step is that you develop an experiment to test that hypothesis. And then once you gather the data from the experiment will either support your hypothesis or it will disprove your hypothesis. Now notice I didn't say the data would prove your hypothesis. You can't prove unequivocally a hypothesis. You can disprove unequivocally a hypothesis, but you can't prove unequivocally a hypothesis. You just find data that further supports it. There's examples of very long-held scientific theory that is still just theory. So, for example, the theory of evolution, there's 150 years of strong data to support the theory, but it's still, in fact, just a theory, and there may become a day when somebody produces data that refutes that theory. So that's the process of science, is that we continue to experiment, we look for things that would help explain our world. There's very few things that we consider laws of nature, maybe the law of gravity. Most everything else are in the area of hypotheses or theories. Now, evidence is the data that's gathered, and it should be gathered in an unbiased way. We try to do this as scientists to make sure that our opinions and our preconceived notions don't impact the way that we collect our data. So an example of that is in a clinical trial, you often will use a placebo control, and this is a way to make sure that and if we blind the placebo, in other words, double blind the placebo, that means not only the people who get the intervention know if they're on active or placebo, the researchers don't know which groups are on the active drug versus the placebo group. So that's a way to make sure that there is no bias among any group. And it's really important to do because we're all humans, scientists are humans too, and sometimes our opinions, our biases can color the research that we do. But we try really hard, and we're trained in such a way to be as unbiased as possible because we're interested in testing our hypotheses and as closely as possible understand the phenomenon that we study as scientists. Now, evidence-based research is typically published in peer-reviewed journals where it can be reviewed and discussed openly by the scientific community. So what's a peer-reviewed journal? A peer-reviewed journal is where other scientists who are experts in that field will look at the research, look at the paper, but they don't have any connection. They don't have a financial connection to those researchers. They don't have a a personal connection to those researchers. They're completely unbiased again, and they can evaluate the research to determine if it's of high quality. And they can also point out areas where maybe it's weak and areas where the research could be strengthened. So that's what's important, is that the data and the research is shared broadly with the community in an open way, so that scientists can discuss it and think about how this advances our understanding of a particular field. Now, it's also important to remember that a conclusion is not evidence. Let's remember the difference between a conclusion and evidence. So a simple example would be to think of a court case or a trial. So somebody who's accused of a crime, the lawyers, the prosecutor and the defense attorneys will present evidence, right? Now, that's not the conclusion. The conclusion would be the verdict, and that would be determined by a judge or a jury. So when someone approaches you and they state something as if it was a fact, a conclusion, and they try to pass that off as evidence, that's actually something you should be very cautious of. So, for example, this is absolutely, the best thing to treat your headaches, and you should definitely take this. They're not presenting data; they're giving you a conclusion, and so you need to be very cautious of that and ask, "Let me see your data. Let me see the evidence that backs up the statement, the very bold statement that you just made." That's what is important, is getting the evidence. Now, as I said, science is a process of questioning and testing. We need to understand how things work by gathering the data. Now, when we were in school, many of you maybe didn't like science. You spent a lot of time memorizing all the facts that you were given, and you may have the impression that science is, in fact, a list of facts. It's not, in fact, a list of facts. It's a list of questions more than anything else. It's a list of things that we think we understand about our natural world. And what we need to do is we need to make sure that people understand the difference between what is fact, what we consider to be open questions of research, and what we consider to be strong consensus in the scientific community to support a particular point of view. And that's why I think it's important that we understand that science is, in fact, a process of questioning, of gathering information, of gathering data that will strengthen or weaken a particular position, a particular way of understanding the world. And I think that that's why science, for example, doesn't play well sometimes on television, because people want, very strong, equivocal statements of fact. And scientists are hesitant to give that because that's not the way we're trained. So another example, another thing to be very weary of, would be wary of the people, or be wary of the people that purport to have the facts, and they're not open-minded. They're going to tell you exactly what you need to do to help your health or your loved one's health. Be very wary of those people. The other people to be very wary of are people that will give you a testimonial. A testimonial is not evidence. This worked for me. This product worked for me. It'll work for you too. That sound familiar? That's the way almost every television ad I've ever seen is run. They're happy people, running around, having taken some medication, and they're thrilled with their lives. And that's, in a sense, a testimonial. A testimonial is not evidence. Even if it's somebody you trust, you can say, "Oh, I gave this to my child, and they improved tenfold." Well, that's one person. And the fact is, you don't know. It could have been a coincidence that they started on some treatment at the same time they showed an improvement. They might have improved anyway. And that's why when we do clinical trials, we have to have large numbers of people, we have to have double-blind placebo control, and we have to make sure that we're not biased in the way that we analyze the data. Attributing cause and effect to one person with one thing is really hard and very dangerous. So when somebody gives you a testimonial, make sure that you're very critical and you question that. And I also point out that what I find remarkable is that FDA-approved drugs are sold on television with testimonials. It's kind of crazy. But these drugs require a huge amount of strong scientific evidence. Otherwise, they couldn't be FDA approved. Yet the marketers for these pharmaceutical companies sell the drugs in a testimonial type format. You'll see these happy people, cooking in their kitchen, managing their type 2 diabetes with diet and exercise, and that's great drug that they're trying to sell you. And they're all happy and smiling. They don't show you all the data, but it's an FDA-approved drug because somewhere in the ad, by law, they have to tell you what the potential side effects are. The medications or the treatments that are sold on television that don't give you a long list of side effects, those are the ones that are not FDA approved, and those are the ones that probably don't have a strong evidence-based research behind it. So those are the ones you need to be very cautious of. So the other thing that I've seen people do that should cause you concern, this technique where people will say, I have some really important information to give you, and it's secret. In fact, the government or the pharmaceutical industry or the medical establishment doesn't want you to know about this because it'll put them out of business or whatever. Those are people those are things you need to be very suspicious of because they don't want you to question. They have created some dogma around their particular point of view, and if you start to question them in the way that a scientist might, they will get angry because they have the answer, and how dare you question them? That's not the way science is done. That's not evidence. That's coming to a conclusion, and anything that's of high quality research will stand up to scrutiny, will stand up to questioning. So make sure that you do that before you make a decision about your health care. And of course, you always want to consult your physician, someone you trust, and someone that knows you and your family well, and not just something that you read off the internet. So that's my little monologue preamble to what is evidence-based research. But I know that people have submitted questions, and I think, Beth, you have a list of questions you want to shoot me. I promised to, when we signed up for this webinar, I promised to take questions. I didn't promise to necessarily be able to answer them. So I'll do my best, but let's go. Let's give it a try.
Okay, great. So our first member submitted question is, how or where can families find out about clinical trials available for individuals with Down syndrome?
That's a great question. So there are a lot of resources you can find. The government has a website called clinicaltrials.gov that lists every single clinical trial for every single disease and drug that is known to man. So you can navigate that if you want to find what's out there. But at LuMind, we've tried to do that for Down syndrome and pull out those trials that are specific to our community. And it's called Clinical Trial Finder, and you can find that on the LuMind website at LuMindIDSC.org.
Thank you. The next question is, are there websites or lists that families can follow to learn about recent research? Or is there something that helps identify which studies are pertinent to specific age groups?
So with respect to, again, with the comment I just made about clinical trials, you can find that on the LuMind website. But I think one of the best resources is the brand new resource that we've, hopefully if you're on this webinar, you already know about, but it's the IDSC LuMind Research Group. And you can pose your research questions. Again, we ask people not to ask for medical advice, especially specific medical advice. It's something that's not medically ethical to do. You need to actually, a physician needs to actually personally examine somebody before they can give medical advice or medical, clear medical advice. But we can give you medical information and research information in the Facebook group, and and you can kind of tailor your questions there.
Thank you very much. When reading research articles posted on social media, how does a person discern the difference between fact-based, peer-reviewed research and research that's maybe less reliable?
So that's a very good question, and I think one of the most important things is to really try to understand what the primary source of the research is. So, we know that a lot of things get inflated and conflated on social media. We saw in the most, in recent elections where political stories were fabricated and put on the internet and then repeated in social media, and those were not based on fact. And the same can be said sometimes in science and medical information. It's important to go back to the primary source to find out where the story came from. Was it research from a reputable journal, from a strong, well-known research institution, and also the other thing is that a lot of times what happens is that an important paper gets published, and it's very technical, and it's very difficult for a layperson to understand it. So a scientific journalist will write about it in their publication, and they try to translate it such that a layperson can understand it. And there's some very good scientific journalists out there. There's some that are not quite as strong, and maybe they either miss the important aspects, or they or when like one part of their story gets repeated, the meaning of the original research gets lost. So it's important to try to go back to, as much as you can, the primary source. The other thing I'm always reminded of when I think about how stories get repeated in social media, it reminds me of the telephone game that I played in elementary school, where my classmates and I would sit in a circle, and the teacher would whisper something to one kid, and it would go all the way around the room, and you get to the end of the line, and the last kid would announce what the message was out loud, and it was completely different from what the teacher originally whispered into the ears of the first child, because things get lost in translation along the way. And so it's the same in social media. Sometimes things get missed. So it's not always on purpose. It's sometimes just a losing of the original meaning. So spend a little time, make sure that it's from a credible source.
Wonderful, thank you. What are some guidelines for assessing Alzheimer's, especially for nonverbal individuals?
So this is a really important issue and question for Down syndrome. As you know, Alzheimer's has a high prevalence in people with Down syndrome, and the way in which Alzheimer's is assessed in terms of cognitive abilities for the sporadic general population, these tools aren't generally useful in Down syndrome. So we're working. There's a few tools that are available for researchers. They're not broadly available for clinical practice as yet, but it's one of the things that LuMind is most interested in right now in terms of trying to find and validate new tools to really assess this. With respect to nonverbal individuals, there really isn't anything at the moment. And again, this is an active area of research. It's something we need. So right now I can't give you a satisfying answer to that question. It's one of those open areas of research.
Thank you. A member asked, I don't have a lot of money. What else can families do to help support Down syndrome research?
Well, that's a great question. So there's a lot of things that you can do. So one thing I would say, first thing is to be an advocate. Be an advocate for research. You contact your elected officials, email them, write them a letter, go to their office, your congressperson or your senator or your governor, whoever it is. I have spent some time in D.C. in my career, not a ton, but some, and I would say that the most important, the people that have the biggest impact on the elected officials are the constituents. I know that we get a little soured when we hear about lobbyists and whatnot. But the people who vote and the people that serve you, those elected officials, they will listen to you. They will definitely listen to you. So if you tell them how important Down syndrome research is to you, they will take it to heart. And if we get enough voices and enough people giving them that message, they will take action. I've seen it before, and I know it can happen again. So that's something that you can do for, again, very little money, just your time and just your energy. The other thing is, we talked about clinical research. Volunteering for clinical trials is something that you can do. Now, not everybody will qualify for every study, but certainly being willing to volunteer to be in a clinical trial is really important. Money is the biggest barrier probably to advancing clinical science and clinical research, but finding qualified volunteers is the second biggest barrier. So, and I would also mention there's a disturbing trend that I've seen in clinical trials recently, where there are some less than reputable people running clinical trials that are asking people to participate in their trials by paying to be in the trial. If you're asked to volunteer to be in a trial, you shouldn't have to pay. You should never have to pay. You might be actually given some money to help with, minor travel expenses or parking. You're parking at a particular medical center where you might have to go, but you shouldn't be asked to pay. If you are, I would say that that's probably not a very ethical group that's running that clinical trial. I've seen this. There's some examples of this in the stem cell area, some experimental stem cell research, where the researchers expect you to pay for the processing of your stem cells to be in the clinical trial. That's not the way reputable clinical trial research is done. So be very cautious of that. So to be in a trial you don't have to be rich to be in a clinical trial.
Great, thank you. Another member asked, I don't know much about Down syndrome research. What are some of the most promising research projects today?
Well, if you want me to tell you which avenues of research are going to lead to approved therapies or the things that are going to break through and lead to the next greatest thing for treatments, I wish I could tell you. If I knew that, I probably wouldn't be working for a nonprofit. I'd be on Wall Street making lots and lots of money. But I can tell you that there is a lot of exciting research going on in Down syndrome. There's a lot of basic science, particularly in the area of genetics, where genetics over the last 25 years or so has really exploded in all areas of human biology, and it also is having an impact in Down syndrome and our understanding of Down syndrome. And I think these could lead to development of new treatments. There's also, as I've said before, the intersection of Down syndrome and Alzheimer's disease. There's a lot of new activity there. We hope that this will be a win-win for people with Down syndrome and the sporadic general population that is also dealing with Down syndrome. By studying both groups and developing drugs for Alzheimer's disease, we hope that will benefit everyone with Alzheimer's disease, whether they have Down syndrome or not. So I'm very cautiously optimistic that we're making great progress there. And there's another area that is quite remarkable, and we still see a lot of work in the area of helping people with their quality of life. So whether it's sleep or speech or we're working on medical devices that will help with sleep apnea, for example. We're also interested in the digital revolution. We all know about that. We all have cell phones and smartphones, et cetera. But there are new medical devices, that wearable devices, et cetera, that can help with the quality of life. And we think that these could actually impact people with Down syndrome as well. So there are a lot of things happening. At LuMind, we're really interested in all these areas, anything that can help with help people with Down syndrome live their best lives, I think that's what we're most interested in.
Exciting. So then what are the biggest obstacles for Down syndrome research today?
Well, as I said, it's the two biggest ones is money. The other is time. It takes a long time to do the proper research, and that can be frustrating when we all want the answers right now, and we want solutions right now. And then finding the right people to volunteer for clinical trials. We're not going to get where we want to get to without enough people in the clinical trials. And the other thing that we need to do is we need to make sure that the people who fund the research, the government, at NIH, that the private industry, the pharmaceutical industry, biotech industry, that they make Down syndrome a priority. And that's one of the things that we're doing at LuMind. We're trying to communicate that need and make sure that it becomes a priority for all these different research organizations.
Great. A member asked, my daughter has a dual diagnosis of Down syndrome and autism. Are there any research looking into that?
Yeah, so this is a very challenging area. I know of, obviously, I just mentioned the great research going on in Down syndrome, and I also know there's great new research going on in the autism field. I don't think there's a lot yet that looks at the intersection between Down syndrome and autism. But like I said about Alzheimer's, hopefully as we learn more about autism, those learnings could be applied to people with Down syndrome too. So not a lot I could tell you about that, but I am seeing, again, exciting new research in the autism space, so hopefully that will also impact people with Down syndrome.
That would be great. So has the recent NIH increase in funding solved the funding problem for Down syndrome, or is there still a funding problem?
Well, I would say no. I'd say it still hasn't solved the funding problem. That we can always use more money. There's an expression, you can never be too rich or too thin. I don't know about the too thin part, but we certainly can always use more money. Since I've joined LuMind in November of last year, I've said repeatedly I could spend millions and millions of dollars and still have more ideas of things to do. So we certainly have plenty of ideas and plenty of things we'd like to do, but it certainly helped. We're not going to turn down the increases in funding, but we want to see more, and we want to make sure that we continue to pressure NIH, Congress, et cetera, to continue to make Down syndrome research a priority. And again, everyone here on the call can help us by making sure that you let your elected officials know that it's important to you. And again, we'll continue to engage with the pharma industry to make sure that they understand it's important to focus on Down syndrome too.
Great. A member asked, I heard there are some approved drugs that may help with memory and cognition. Isn't it better to focus on those since pharma isn't investing in research for a small population like ours?
Yeah, so there has been some Down syndrome trials on some of these drugs that are approved in Alzheimer's disease to help with cognition in Alzheimer's disease. Unfortunately, those trials didn't do much in the Down syndrome population. As I said before, we're trying to change the perceptions at LuMind. We're trying to change perceptions at the pharmaceutical industries. We have worked to try to change those, what they're doing, and to try to look at developing new therapies for this population. So it's a process. It's a work in process, but we're trying to do our best.
Okay. So how can we get pharma to invest in research for Down syndrome?
Yeah, so I think it's through education. As I said, I've been with LuMind for just a few months, and with our CEO, Hans Hillerstrom, I've been to a couple of pharmaceutical meetings and meetings with big pharmaceutical companies. We have a couple more coming up in the next couple of weeks. And I would say that it's quite surprising that they know very little about Down syndrome. So we are in the process of educating them. Obviously, they wouldn't take our meetings if they had no interest at all. But I think it's something we need to continue to do. We need to make sure that they hear the message, they know about this really important population, and they start to make it a priority. So we're going to continue to do that, and we're going to continue to engage with these companies as much as we can. And I would also say we're also interested in engaging with companies that develop diagnostic tools as well, not just pharmaceutical industry. So there's a lot we're doing, and that's also why we've started building the Down Syndrome Clinical Trial Network at LuMind, the DSCTN. We're trying to build this network. We have right now 11 sites, but we have 2 pharmaceutical companies, Lundbeck and AC Immune, that are financially supporting the building of this network. And we hope that this network will then be available to help advance clinical research, to be able to try new drugs and test new drugs in the trials network. So we have 2 sponsors, 2 pharma sponsors. We hope we can get more, and we also hope we can communicate the need and the urgency to really do research in this population.
Thank you. Another question is, I heard that research to prevent Alzheimer's and Down syndrome could help the general population. Why aren't we making that point more often?
Well, we're trying. We're trying to make it a lot, and I think it is. I guess, as I said before, I think this has a potential win-win. So, I think if we understand Alzheimer's disease in the Down syndrome population, that will help us understand Alzheimer's disease in the general population. And I think if we understood Alzheimer's disease in the general population better, we might understand it better in Down syndrome. And I'm hoping that there will be drugs approved. Drugs could be approved in the Down syndrome population, and that might then be more widely used generally, and vice versa. I hope that there are these drugs that we hope will see approval soon, that will be much better drugs for Alzheimer's disease, that they will also be useful in Down syndrome. But we also have to recognize there are differences between the general population and the Down syndrome population. And obviously, people with Down syndrome get Alzheimer's disease at a younger age than the general population, and there are other differences as well that we need to make sure that we don't see unusual safety issues or other unusual things that we don't expect, and that's why we do need to do the research in Down syndrome. So at LuMind, we're trying to make this case as much as we can, and make sure that the people who are developing and doing drugs for Alzheimer's disease and who are doing research in Alzheimer's disease know about the connection to Down syndrome.
Great. So are there examples of research on dietary supplements that are useful in Down syndrome?
So this is actually a very hot, very timely question. Just this week, actually, the FDA issued warning letters to several manufacturers of dietary supplements who were making claims about being able to treat Alzheimer's disease. And the thing with dietary supplements, they are able to be sold and marketed in the United States without FDA approval. And the reason for that, or the thinking behind that, is that they're generally natural, from natural sources. They're vitamins or they're other extracts from natural sources. Therefore, they should be safe. And so let me comment about that part of it first. Safety of anything is a matter of dose. Anything can be dangerous at too high of a dose. So even if it's a dietary supplement, I would really highly recommend that you talk to your doctor about it before you start it, and also talk to your doctor about what kind of medications you or your loved one is on before you start on a dietary supplement, because the supplement could actually change the way you metabolize the drugs, the other drugs you're taking. You may have had an experience where you might have been given a new prescription and your doctor told you not to eat grapefruit or drink grapefruit juice while you're on the drug. And grapefruit is a natural substance, right? But it does change the way that you metabolize things. And it could change the way that you metabolize a specific drug. So that's why it's important, if you're going to start on try a new dietary supplement, that you talk it over with your doctor, especially if you're on other on medications, to make sure that you don't change the way that those drugs behave. The other thing I would say is that because they're able to be sold without FDA approval, the supplements, is they don't have some of them don't have very strong evidence to support it. And the reason that these companies got in trouble with the FDA for marketing for Alzheimer's disease is they were making claims that were unsupported by their research. That's the only way the FDA can really take action, is when people make unsubstantiated claims. Where would you want to use a dietary supplement? I think if you had a blood test from your doctor and your doctor said, oh, you're deficient in this key nutrient, you should take a supplement. So that's where you might want to consider it. You might want to consider changing your diet first to see if that helps, because dietary sources of key nutrients are probably a better source, because let's take, for example, if you want more omega-3s in your diet, you don't know for sure how the manufacturer manufactured the pill that you take that's supposed to be full of omega-3 fatty acid. But if you eat a piece of salmon, I guarantee you there's omega-3s in that piece of salmon. So you don't have to worry about the quality of that source. So that's where I think you might want to consider dietary change before you go into a supplement. But the supplement for people who are deficient, in particular vitamins or minerals, is a good option if your doctor advises it. I also want to mention another example of a so-called dietary supplement that really should cause you cause. You may have seen commercials on television for a product called Prevagen, which is supposed to help your memory. So Prevagen is this product they say comes from jellyfish. So personally, I don't eat jellyfish very regularly, so I'm not sure exactly why it's a dietary supplement, but nevertheless, it's a protein found in jellyfish, and it's supposed to help your memory. So what was the primary source of this claim that Prevagen makes? Well, they did, in fact, do a clinical trial. They did a clinical trial on 30 people, healthy older people. Nobody had memory complaints. They didn't have Alzheimer's disease or anything like that. Everybody got Prevagen. Nobody got a placebo. There was no blind. There was no placebo arm, nothing. Everybody got the medication or the supplement, and they were followed for 3 months. And lo and behold, everybody who was given this thing that was supposed to help their memory showed that they improved their memory. So that is what the little chart you see on their TV commercial, this little chart, bar charts with the arrow going up over 3 months. That proved, I think they say clinically shown, not clinically proven, clinically shown to improve memory. This is a $1 billion market that they have, and it's based on that little bit of data. And so I would say that, be very aware if considering, or if you're taking Prevagen, what it is you're taking. It may in fact work, but the data that they have gathered doesn't convince me. They need to do more research to prove it. I don't think they have any plans of doing it. They're making a ton of money, and they're happy to take your money. So that's my little pitch on evidence-based research. And like as I said, buyer beware. Beth, are any more questions?
That is the end of our member-submitted questions. So do you have any closing thoughts before we?
Yeah, I just wanted to finish off with a couple of closing comments around evidence-based research. So really, I just want to remind everybody that if you read something, a bold claim, any bold claims that somebody's going to make to you, that you read or somebody says to you, it requires very strong evidence. Demand to see the evidence. Don't just take their word for it. Question the bold claims. Be sure you know the source of the information. I think our community we do a disservice by propagating rumors and myths and falsehoods that are masquerading as science. So really, let's question everything. The good stuff can stand up to the questions. The bad stuff will fall apart. So thank you very much for your attention. And if anybody has more questions, you certainly can find us on the IDSC LuMind Facebook page. We're happy to try to get your questions. We may not be as fast as you might like, but we'll get there. We'll get them answered as best we can. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, everyone.